Starting with the biggest stories, the biggest questions that we have still remaining, I think there's really only one place to start. It's kind of crazy how little we're talking about this right now because of how much of a stalemate seems to have been reached between the two sides. But we still don't know what a 26-year-old former MVP, where he is going to play this offseason because he's on the non-exclusive franchise tag.
It's wild how little reporting there's been.
It's
I think
crazy.
it makes sense, because he doesn't have an agent, and that's who supplies a lot of these reports. I think the Ravens are somewhat in the dark of what's going on. I think, they made their offer, but I think otherwise there's not a lot of communication going on. We're hearing a lot of media who's like upset with how Lamar does things, but I think that's partly because a lot of the insiders are on the same team as the agents, and they don't like this lack of information. And I guess I would throw it back to you just talking Lamar, because we're just guessing at this point. Like, one of the big questions I have is like when this happens, because something I believe will happen. And to me, the draft is kind of the obvious, pressure point, or draft week. And we've seen some bigger veteran QB trades happen sometimes in that week before the draft. And I don't know if it's going to take that long, like, especially for a team like the Colts, if they were going to be the team that gets in there. But that's part of the equation, is like at some point the Ravens have to move forward with their team building process. And it feels like the draft is the deadline, if nothing else.
What do you think is like the main catalyst here, or like the most likely timeline? It's hard for me to understand what the timeline is going to be because I don't know what's going to force the action when you think about all the things that are on the table.
Well, I think the draft is like those picks that could go in the draft become a lot less valuable right afterwards.
Yes,
I
think that's fair.
Between now and then, I don't know what it is. Structuring a contract that you feel like in a way is going to give the Colts, the Ravens, a problem if they do it. I keep saying the Colts because there has been, not just guessing, I've tried to dig around on this. I don't think it would surprise anyone if the Colts of all teams end up being the one that makes a run on him. And to me, it would make sense to time it close to draft time.
What do you think is the most likely outcome?
I guess Ravens just staying, if I have to like pick one team over the others. But if I can pick the field, I still actually am taking like the field, that basically the Ravens and another team that we have no idea who it's going to be negotiate a trade. It's not going to be exactly the offer sheet. I don't know if it gets to that point. And I really do think the Colts are the strongest candidate.
I think they are too. The second question I had here, which we'll get into in a second, is what is the Colts' plan? Because they're in this weird middle ground after the quarterback trades and where they sit in the draft. I just don't know what I think is the most likely thing, because I've gone back and forth on this, and I think a lot of teams felt this way, where they didn't feel inclined to chase him or to provide an offer sheet because they just assumed that Baltimore would match it. I remember talking to people at the Combine, and it kind of felt that way, but I think that's ignoring how much real bad feelings seem to exist here on both sides. So I don't know. It just still is hard for me to imagine them walking away from him, even if it's for a pretty hefty draft haul, just because the unknown when you have a guy who's done what he's done seems like a really scary timeline. But as we get deeper and deeper into it, it just feels like there's more of a chance that it ends up happening, that he ends up playing elsewhere.
Right. If that offer that Lamar kind of threw out there on Twitter, 133 for 3 guaranteed, was real, like, okay, that's a starting point that another team could try to really front load, a team that has cap space, and try to create the cap space, front load the first couple of years of the deal to make it very hard for Baltimore to deal with. And if Lamar makes it clear he doesn't want to be there, I just kind of wonder from Baltimore's perspective, like, they haven't done anything this offseason. I think they're second or third fewest in terms of money spent this offseason. And because of Lamar being such a unique player, like, if they were going to move on from Lamar, you have to build an offense around him and offensive coordinator Todd Monken that makes sense. And it's like, when does that process start? Like, you would want to start that process if you were going to do it.
Yeah, it seems like they would be incentivized to do that. The 3 for 33 thing, or 133 thing, brings me back to a conversation that we had a little bit earlier about this, is that I'm wondering what the most important parts of a negotiation are for Lamar on Lamar's side of it. Is it just having a fully guaranteed deal? Because then if you do it at a short-term deal, you're not really worried about having him giving him guarantees into year 4 and 5 and making that kind of like an unprecedented move where you're worried that he's going to be getting a little bit older. You just have less financial flexibility to add void years onto it and move money around and things like that. So I guess it's a sliding scale on both sides, but I think the only having 2 to 3 years, like 3 years of fully guarantees, that just seems like a palatable option for some of these teams, because the downside of giving him guarantees into year 4 and 5 as he creeps over 30, that doesn't play into it if you're making it a short-term deal.
Right. I think it would. He's kind of put it out there that, look, I'm not asking for a fully guaranteed contract. You know, my old boss Florio put it out that some teams look at it like practically it would be, because, you know, he's looking for something like 200 guaranteed. If Kyler got 180, or you could argue whether it was 160, 180, he's probably aiming for north of that. But it really does feel like there's respect factor here, wanting to be wanted. We don't know. We're projecting a lot because we're used to leaks and we're used to like players making it clear what they want. Like I like that Lamar's doing it differently. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I respect that. Like, it's like one guy and his mom and the way he's doing it, deciding to do it their way. We don't know exactly what all the goals are, all the motivations. He might just want to get somewhere warm. He might want to just have freedom. Like, I don't know like what his motivation is, but I'm rooting for him. It feels like one man against like the rest of the league's like operation.
A year ago, like a year ago this summer, when we were thinking about what could be on the horizon with this, I was rooting for him to kind of take it to the end, because we've never really seen it happen before. You know, the only guy we've really seen do that is Kirk Cousins. And Lamar is on a much different plane than Kirk Cousins. So just out of curiosity, like, what would it really look like if a quarterback tried to exert every bit of leverage that he has, and a team had to pull every single lever it had to try to keep him under contract? And it feels like this is a tiny bit different in that I think in another version of this standoff, a team would use the exclusive tag because they wouldn't lose him under any circumstances. But I think that by doing the non-exclusive tag, the Ravens have put the ball in other teams' courts and forced them to do the negotiating, which is its own little spin on this entire thing because of how unique the situation is. So seeing it all play out, like every step of it, all the way to the furthest extreme, has been a fun curiosity, if anything.
But extremely unpleasant for the Ravens, for the media in Baltimore, who have to talk about this every single day. For us, I guess a little bit. And then for Lamar Jackson, I kind of doubt he wants this to just be going on and on, but there is a world where he plays under this franchise tag and is hoping to get to free agency. But that was one of the benefits of going with the non-exclusive tag, is the Ravens could probably afford to tag him again, which they wouldn't have been able to if they had made him the exclusive free agent tag.
And I'm wondering how realistic that timeline is if he just plays on the tag. So, I mean, those are the different outcomes that we have. He gets traded, he gets signed to a long-term extension in Baltimore, and he plays on the tags.
Here's the thing, though, Robert. Their number 2 receiver is still Devin Duvernay.
I know.
They've lost, or they cut Calais Campbell, who was a factor for them. Guys who had a lot of snaps, Marcus Peters, Justin Houston. Like, those are older guys. But they have questions like defensive line. I still don't really see a great pass rush. They lost Ben Powers in free agency. They can usually develop. But in terms of the weapons around Lamar, like, that hasn't changed. And Tyler Huntley's actually out there for anyone to go sign too, by the way. I had the really galaxy brain idea. Some team, the Colts, and it's not going to happen. They signed Gardner Minshew. They should sign both Lamar Jackson and Tyler Huntley to offer sheets at the exact same time.